I thought, as usual, they were excellent. I only found one typo, which was on the second page of the agriculture report, where CMAP, the Southeastern Massachusetts Agricultural Partnership, was CMAP instead of SEMAP. But did anyone else have a chance to look at it or find any errors or omissions? And if not, would someone make a motion to approve them?
I make a motion to approve the minutes as amended by John.
Okay, so Mike Sullivan moved, Mike Yagman second. All those in favor say aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Thank you very much. The mics. Michael, staying with the mics, Michael Burris, you want to tell us a little bit about the open meeting law certifications?
Yeah, also on there is getting sworn in, and everyone on this call is sworn in. So I don't think I need to belabor that point, but the open meeting law certifications are something that we're supposed to have on file. It's required from this Attorney General's office. So we will circulate, we'll contact folks who haven't submitted one yet, and we'll just maintain that in a file. And if there's ever an open meeting law complaint, I'm sure they'll check for that. So we just want to make sure we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's.
It looks like maybe only Mark Rasmussen, but we'll contact you guys so you can do that. Is there training involved in that too?
There are, yeah, I mean, when you certify that you viewed the materials. So there's a guide, and there are videos out there you can watch, but it's really just the guide that you're supposed to go to. And
how long is it good for once you do it?
I think it's good as long as you're current on the committee. I don't think it can be renewed.
I think it's 2 years. I think it's 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So Michael, we'll stay with you. Staff updates you got 2 updates.
Yeah, the first update is on our municipal vulnerability preparedness grant. So we contracted with SERPED. For those of you unfamiliar with the acronym, that's the Southeastern Regional Planning and Economic Development District. We're working with their environmental division to administer this grant. We also have an equity contract subcontractor called Conditioning Leaders to help out with this project. Right now, the phase of the project that we're in is developing what is called a social resilience roadmap. What we're doing here is identifying the populations in Westport that may be disproportionately impacted by climate change, and trying to do some initial engagement, either with people who work with those communities or have family in those communities, things of that nature. And so we'll use this information to help build our core team. And for the folks who are on the core team, this is so there are two categories for the core team. There's more of the town end on the core team. So that would be like town staff and representatives from boards and committees. And then the other half of the team it's supposed to be more community at large folks. And so the people that we're looking for to be on the core team would be community members or people who have strong ties to youth, seniors, agriculture, disability, and low income. We could also have caregivers for seniors or people with disabilities, folks with chronic illnesses, or people experiencing food or housing insecurity, low incomes, high energy burdens, so on and so forth. We have a bit of a job, quote unquote, job description for this, because our at-large community members will get paid. They will get paid to the tune of $40 an hour. And so there's probably about 80 hours of work over the course of 2 years to do for this. So that's $3,200 that our community liaisons could get paid. So if you know anyone who is interested in this, please get them in touch with me. I'll give them the job, quote unquote, job description, and then we'll, get them set up to get reimbursed through the grant. Oh, and then I'll say our next steps here after we finish this is when we'll really start the community engagement process. We'll have a fully formed committee, and there's some trainings associated with that. And then we'll be getting started probably in January.
Any questions of Michael on MVP?
Michael, how important is it to get a student, a young person, like a high school student? Because we could get back in touch with the person we met with last spring, if that was an important constituent.
Yeah, we would like to have someone there. The youth population is definitely a population that we'd like to engage with. I have reached out to, I can't recall his name, but I've reached out to the environmental club's advisor, and I haven't heard back from him yet, but I'll be following up with them because, yeah, having someone from high school on this project would be really valuable.
Yeah, he's the right person. He was very supportive when we met with him.
Okay.
Any other questions? I don't see any hands up on MVP. If not, you want to talk about hazard mitigation grant?
Yeah, I've actually got one more MVP item.
Oh, all right.
It's the action grant expression of interest. So I worked with Jason Claremont and Ross Moran. Jason Claremont's from Buzzards Bay Coalition, and Ross Moran's from the Westport Land Conservation Trust, to submit an expression of interest to the MVP program for a habitat restoration and stormwater improvement grant, or a request for funds to do habitat restoration and stormwater improvements. And so what we're going to do, if they give us a thumbs, the EOI, they'll essentially give us a thumbs up or thumbs down. Yes, this is a good fit or not. And so if they give us the notice to proceed with a full grant application, what we'll be applying for is funds to improve habitat conditions for sea-run brook trout. And this would involve culvert or designs of culvert replacements and doing data collection to inform those designs. There are a couple different locations where we would do this: Cornell Road at Angeline Brook, Drift Road at Lyons Brook, and Drift Road at Snell Creek. So I don't have a timeline on when we can expect a response, but perhaps that'll be in the works sometime next year.
I know we got Mark Rasmussen here from the coalition. Mark, do you want to add anything? You're on mute.
Okay, sorry. So I just want to thank Michael for always being on getting these expressions of interest in. So we've been pitching this concept to as many funders as we can for dealing with connectivity to cold water streams, helping the town fix old culverts at the same time as dealing with stormwater. They end up being really nice packages. So just fingers crossed. It's a good one. We'll keep on trying.
Thanks, Mark.
Yep.
Any questions of either Mark or Michael?
We just got the note today from Joe Costa. Is what that
Yeah.
one of the is that one of the ones you were just talking about, Michael? Or I got the note today. The Buzzards Bay National Westport Project.
Yeah, we could apply. So if we were to get the go ahead for to apply for the grant, we could use that as a potential match source for the grant application. So we would have to apply to that as well to Buzzards Bay, but yeah, we could use that as match funds.
Any other questions? Then you want to move on to the hazard mitigation?
Yeah, so we were finally notified of an award for this program. We received $19,800 to pull together a hazard mitigation plan, and so we will put this out to an RFP and try to find a consultant for it. The hazard mitigation plan, it's different than an emergency response plan. So an emergency response plan is responding to the disaster event, whereas the hazard mitigation plan identifies the town risks, and then we'll have a series of policy recommendations to mitigate loss of life and property during storm events. So I have a kickoff meeting with the grantor next month, and we're looking forward to getting this moving because it's something that we applied for a year ago. So it's taken a long time for the decisions to make its way through FEMA and then through MEMA as well. So looking forward to getting started on this one.
Great. Any questions of Michael on the hazard mitigation grant?
Michael, is it only storm events or does extreme heat qualify as well?
I would say that extreme heat would qualify. It's going to identify hazards more generally in the town, so it's not just water hazards.
That's a great question, Mike Yagman.
Yeah, I mean, I think that more and more I'm hearing that providing a green canopy is both, much more economically manageable than just buying air conditioners and better for the environment overall. So that might be something we could propose in the grant.
Mm-hmm.
Just planting trees.
Yep. Good question and good suggestion. Any other questions of Michael Burris? Okay, thank you, Michael. Moving on to subcommittee reports and minutes. We've gotten a number of reports in. Appreciate all of that. First up the bat would be engagement and fundraising. Jeff, are you going to give that? You're on mute.
Hi, John. Thanks. Yeah, I can give you a quick update. We have not participated in any outreach or engagement activities since we last met. We're trying to just catch those as we can, not having any real funding to pull materials or things together. We have, some basic outreach materials, a basic fact sheet about what the committee is doing, and a banner we could use at a table. So if there are opportunities for us to use what we have right now, we'll be happy to show up and participate in anything that comes on our radar. I do want to remind the committee that we have, over a year ago prepared kind of a laundry list of groups and events that would be relevant for this committee to participate in or engage with, and we welcome any review and input further identifying those kind of opportunities or other groups. I've taken some of the groups that Michael's been talking with for this grant and added them to the list. So we do have a good base of opportunities and groups. Once the committee has, some more concrete facts or topics to engage the community with, we can start planning to work with them. The only other thing, we did have a brief opportunity to take a look at a FEMA grant, the BRIC Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities grant, expression of interest came out on that. We only had a week to respond, and upon review, Michael and I looked at it, and there were some prerequisites that we just wouldn't be able to pull together in time for that. But that should be on our radar for future grant options as well.
All right, Jeff. Do you have a next meeting or anything set up, or that's to be scheduled?
None at the moment, but I'd like to pull together some of these, a bit of a forecast of future grant opportunities and get the group together once I have that so that we could start evaluating them and prioritizing them.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jeff. Next is water. Mike Sullivan, back in the Northern Hemisphere.
Thanks, John. I haven't made any progress since my last report. We're probably 85% done with our water report to this committee. And I've got some ends to tie up with some of the members that have promised me a little bit of input on some of the individual topics. One of the things that I need to complete is I'd like to include in the report, as we know, we break down global warming, climate change into the specific problems that we're dealing with, such as sea level rise, warming oceans, potential changes in the Gulf Stream, localized climate change, and so forth. So what I'd like to do is finish putting in what we think are our best projections for each of those attributes at this time. In fact, Phil's new report that he just put out had some pretty good quantification of heating days and days over 90 degrees and such that will help me in that one section. So I hope that by the time we meet again, we'll have a draft report for you guys to have a look at. Finished draft.
I'm going to come back to that when we get to other business at the end, Mike, for a suggestion on something that might be helpful, but we'll hold it till the end of the meeting.
And if I could say just a little report on one little project, I shouldn't say little project. Mark's on the call here. He and Buzzards Bay have a big project to look at the potential impact of the causeway on both the beaches and the flushing of the Westport River and a couple of other, Allen's Pond and the Slocum River, a couple other inlets. And he's put us in touch with their principal investigators at Boston University. And we've shared some of our tidal information for inside the river. A big part of their project is going to be to model the inside of the river and how it flushes out and such. And as part of that, we also managed to get out ahead of last big storm in September and install some tide gauges on either side of the causeway, which is they were down on the bottom, about 15 feet down. So we had to dive down, auger them in. We managed to get 2 weeks worth of data, but we've been stymied by the weather and some other scheduling issues. So I had to finally give up. I'm leaving them out there for the winter. We'll get them in the spring and get the rest of the data. But I am a little delinquent, Mark, in getting a report to Sergio on just what we actually collected for data on tide and current flow in those two areas. So hoping that's going to be of value. We'll see.
Mike, do you have a next meeting date or anything figured out yet?
No, because I threatened, probably not the right way to do it. I threatened not to have a meeting until I had everybody's input. And I think they're holding out on the input so we don't have a meeting.
Maybe set a date and say you need to have it by the date you set. Do it the other way.
I did that once. Didn't work.
All right.
I'll try again.
Okay. All right. Next is infrastructure. And I think Bob Daler's in South Carolina right now. I did talk to Bob at the planning board on Tuesday. And I think we have a different kind of problem here, which is I think we've got all the information for a report in Bob's head. And the challenge is how to get it from Bob's head onto a piece of paper. And I'm working on that. I think a really bright college student, there's an opportunity, and I've reached out to a senior official at UMD because I think it would be a great mentoring opportunity for just the right kind of student to work with Bob and help get a funnel in Bob's ear. And Bob's written the outline, and just talk to him, listen to him, ask him questions like a good reporter, and then we'd have the report. And the student would have a co-authored paper with Bob, which would be great for his or her, young career. So I think I'm going to have coffee with the official at UMD to see if we can find this kind of student. At any rate, if there are volunteers, the problem with infrastructure is we've got one super person, but it's a one-person committee. And so if there are other people interested in that committee, as Bob said, we need some volunteers there. Any questions on that or volunteers? Oh, I see all kinds of hands going up. No, I don't. So let me know or let Michael Burris know, and we'll see if we can build out that committee. It's a very important one. It's the one committee, I think all the other committees have a kind of public aspect, and they also have a private aspect in terms of anticipated recommendations. This one is, I think, really heavily weighted, if not 100%, at public recommendations. So anyway, that's infrastructure. Health, Phil, you've got submitted a really excellent report. You want to kind of summarize? I don't know whether that's a deep dive into one area you're looking at or what, but thank you for getting that in.
You're on mute, Phil.
Still on mute, Phil. There you go.
So again, thank you. And I'll just try to do an overview with maybe just a sprinkling of some of the data. So I started off in the report, in the help with my team, just trying to distinguish between what I call the kind of direct impacts related primarily to temperature, at the physical, the physiological, and also the mental health, and the collateral impacts of increased temperature, sea level rise, flooding, extreme weather events, and saltwater intrusion. And because those impacts all affect essential health infrastructure like housing and and food and safe water and sewage management, all those things are critical to healthy living standards. A lot of those are addressed in the water report, so I didn't bother to talk about those, and I focused on the kind of physical and mental health piece of it. And a big assistance in my developing this report is looking at the 2022, the Commonwealth's 2022 climate assessment report and its hazard mitigation report. And I recommend people to take a look at those because because they're focused in Massachusetts, and they take the global climate temperature models and reduce them to regions. And we are in the South Coast Cape regional, the South Coast Islands and Cape region. And so, and being able to downscale the very large, global temperature models was really helpful. And I integrated some aspects of Westport's specific characteristics, because we are, not only do we get the benefit of coastal cooling as compared to inland areas, but we also have an enormous amount of green space and surface water, which gives us the fortunate avoidance of a lot of the heat island effects that impact cities and urban areas, which really spike their future heat projections. So the other aspect of the of the climate assessment and hazard mitigation reports, they establish three priorities, or they establish priorities. And interestingly, extreme heat is not the number one priority for coastal communities. It happens to be vector transmission through mosquitoes, ticks, is the number one priority in our region for Lyme disease, for tropical diseases and bacterial diseases. So we talk about that. Then there's extreme heat itself, which I think we're all aware of, both on physiologically, and there's a separate section on mental health and the impact of extreme heat on mental health. And the third one is air quality, having to do with pollen and particulates and its impact on respiratory diseases, asthma, and cardiovascular impacts. And then there's a section that breaks out what vulnerable populations are, because a lot of heat impacts are particularly impactful on vulnerable populations. So the Mass Department of Public Health has also identified climate vulnerable populations. And then the last one part is about what we're doing now about extreme heat, in terms of what the Council of Aging does, the police and the fire department through the EMTs. And then there's a planning recommendation section about what we can do in a whole bunch of areas moving forward. That's it.
Thank you, Phil. I think that is really excellent work, and you've got a great team you're working with. Michael Yagman or any other members of the team want to add anything? Do you have a?
I will.
Speech? Oh,
I will,
yeah.
John.
Donna, there you are. I didn't
I
see
didn't
you,
have to
Donna.
tell you that when Phil, did this report, he actually called the czar of climate resilience in Massachusetts because he found a discrepancy that was confusing. And lo and behold, Phil was able to identify that they actually made a mistake. So I just want to say how hard, I appreciate working with Phil because he worked so hard and he gets all the details. But he, he said he had to call. You called her, Phil, because she was the only one that had climate in her credentials, correct?
It's true. It was a bit of a well, I didn't think it was a bit nitpicking question, but one report said it was cooler in inland areas than on coastal areas than inland areas. The other report said the opposite, and I couldn't reconcile those two differences. And I wanted to put that statement in the report one way or the other. So I decided to write an email to the climate chief, the climate czar, in which I said, normally I wouldn't bother anybody about this nitpicking problem, but you have the only one have climate in your title. And 2 days later, she wrote me back, sent me to her deputy who brought her team in and wrote back to me that, yes, it was wrong. And they were going to correct the report. So that was kind of funny.
All right.
Okay.
Any other questions? Or did you weren't finished, Donna? Sorry.
No, it just says to the quality of the people that are working in these committees that you can read something and then identify something conflicting and clarify it. And so he was able to get them to make changes in what they were reporting based on that. So it just makes me feel good to know the quality of people that are on these committees here in Westport and how smart they are and how they're hard working to get these things taken care of. That's all.
Thank you very much. And
Excellent work, Phil. Excellent work.
right on cue, we get to agriculture, and I see on my Hollywood Squares, Joseph Inglesby is in the house. And so, Joseph, you also have submitted some excellent work on behalf of the Agriculture Committee. So you want to summarize where you are with that?
Yeah, thank you, John. Yes, of course. Since the last meeting, we reached out to the farming community, and we did that with a fact sheet initially, which looked at the key messages described basically through the state climate summary from Massachusetts, which included three principal areas of concern: temperature, precipitation, and sea level rise. And I wrote a piece that said, as farmers and fishers, you already know that the weather fluctuates seasonally. In the past years, we've experienced extended drought and heat, mild snowless winters, Arctic oscillations, late frosts and fluctuations, and rainfall. Could you help us to better understand how this affects you and the greater community by answering these questions from your perspective? So what I did is I went through CMAP and also personal contacts who look at the farmers and fishers of Westport and Dartmouth, actually, and broke it down according to of land and of the sea. So of land, I looked at soils, crops, flowers, honeybees, dairy, beef, lamb, pork, poultry, and let's see, and then continued berries, grapes, hops, orchards, nurseries, into forestry for land, and then of sea, I reached out to shellfish, lobsters, and the fishing community on it, and I sent out a questionnaire, which before I sent anything, I sent it to our chairman and to John to review. And I did send it out to everyone listed, including CMAP and the CMAP public relations person as well. So that, which I think sort of completed the cycle. But and I also asked for additional farmers and fishers that we could reach out to get information. And with John's help, we did get in touch with Fred Dabney in addition to CMAP. So what I asked in the questionnaire is, can you describe your farming and fishing operation? How has temperature variability, precipitation, uncertainty, and sea level rise concerns affected your farming and or fishing? Temperature, precipitation, sea level rise, and then it would fill in under it. And then how are you adapting to seasonal changes that may affect your business? What recommendations would you suggest that the community could work towards? What policy and long-term planning strategy would improve the future outlook for you? And thank you for your recommendation. And I've followed this up with a 6 key strategies that could be taken. And I have to admit, it's not original, because what I did is I looked at what Cornell had developed over the years, and I thought that it could be applied to Westport's climate resilience plan. And the 6 key strategies are focus on soil health, and they give recommendations of what could be done. Efficiently manage water resources and risks. It's number 2. Number 3 is utilize integrated pest management with recommendations. Number 4 is diversify farm enterprises, species, crop varieties, and breeds. Number 5 is reduce livestock stress from extreme temperatures. And number 6 is to engage in farm planning and adaptive management. And then this would tie in with photographs of the farms. So what we're hoping is part of all of this, an outcome of this, is that perhaps with Ray's help, we could arrange to have a community meeting and actually meet with the farmers and fishers in the area and hash this out, and then perhaps document it so that you would have firsthand experience of the changes that are occurring in town and how the farmers and fishermen and fisher ladies are dealing with this for the future. So those are the that's the summary of this phase of the recommendations for the agricultural subcommittee here.
Thank you, Joseph. Has this already gone out? And if so, have you gotten any feedback yet?
Not yet. It was sent out, but that's why I think that a community forum would help. As Ray mentioned, the farmers are busy right now, buttoning things up, I think, for the season. And but I think that if we dealt with it on a first-hand personal basis, which is what I think CMAP did for their article, which looked at regional climate change, which is in their latest newsletter, that would be the most direct way to do it. Because I know years ago, 10 years ago, when I was on the Dartmouth Historical Commission, I developed an exhibit and publication called Farmers and Fishers, Portraits, Words, and Tools, with an exhibition in the town hall. And we actually interviewed the farmers and photographed, documented, recorded their words. And that, I think, really brought it to life. I think you have to deal on a first name and personal basis. And sometimes the summaries seem, or these mailings seem impersonal. But if I meet with them in person, that might help.
A couple of things. One, this may be an area where Jeff Canton and his committee on engagement may intersect with you and be helpful. And secondly, I know that Saturday is a fundraiser for CMAP at Kilburn Mill, which you're probably aware of, where Jenny Slate is going to do readings from her book Little Weirds to raise funds for CMAP. So there may be a good audience there that you could interact with and let them know about the project. Anyway, other questions of Joseph? This is really interesting, Joseph. I think that you're really on the right track. Any questions or comments for Joseph?
Well, this is Phil. I was just wondering if the Agricultural Commission is involved in that. Because having been at not recently, but a bunch of meetings, that's where those folks gather around the table.
Well, I was sort of hoping that it would go through Ray Raposa, but I've submitted all the material, but I haven't actually sat down to meet with the Agricultural Committee in town as yet. And perhaps I should.
Well, I know because I've talked to Ray quite a bit on this, and he's very supportive of the direction this is going. He's also feeling a little bit discouraged at the lack of participation in the Ag Commission. And so perhaps this is a way of rejuvenating interest in that. You know, Phil, better than anyone, the intense interest when the registry issue was being discussed, all the plaid shirts that showed up at the town meeting around that issue. But Ray is having a hard time getting it, people to turn out for Ag Commission meetings. All right, if there aren't really good work, Joseph, so keep it up, and let's strategize on ways that we can get people looking at that, talking about the questions, filling it out, and responding to the issues that you've asked them to think about.
Let me just ask, on Saturday, you mentioned that Jenny Slade will be meeting with CMAP. Do you know what time that is? Because I'm going to be out of town, and I'm not certain when I'll be back. Is that in the evening or?
Yeah, hold on a sec. It's either 6 or 7. I'll tell you in a second. It's 7 o'clock at the Kilburn Mill up on the top floor.
Uh-huh. All right.
Okay, the last item is historic structures, and I don't think we have Wendy here. So no update on progress there. So the last major item on the agenda is Dave Sprogus has a presentation on the use of representative concentration pathway, RCP 8.5. I looked at this. This is a advanced class. Dave, does it have prerequisites that we should have taken before listening to this? We're going to learn a lot. No, we can do it even without prerequisites.
I believe that I can explain it thoroughly. Thank you for asking.
Okay. All right, David, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen and ask that you can see it.
I can see it. Can others?
Mhm.
I assume therefore others can see it.
Great. I'm going to ask that you hold your questions until the end, and I won't be watching the chat. So, if you want to write in the chat and we can follow up on chat questions at the end, that's fine too. This is a lengthy presentation and I'd like to get through the whole thing. So thank you and good evening. This presentation is all about RCP 8.5 with 6 sections. Why should we care? Casting doubt on RCP 8.5. What is RCP 8.5? What's the problem with using RCP 8.5? And which RCP should Westport use? Yes, there are other RCPs, and I provide a recommendation. Why should we care about RCP? RCP, or Representative Concentration Pathway, is a scenario used in climate modeling to project future greenhouse gas concentrations and their potential impact on global climate. In our case, one impact we care very deeply about is sea level rise. On this slide, we have a timeline starting from today and going out 120 years. Below the timeline are coastal inundation illustrations. In order to plan effectively, we need to know when to expect inundation. We need to know the timing so that we can answer questions such as, when does the property become uninsurable? When do banks refuse financing? When does the town stop investing in roads and other infrastructure? When will the beach become closed to the public? And when will my property become worthless? Fortunately, RCP is the tool to help us understand and plan accordingly. However, there is a big variable in RCP called radiative forcing, which governs the timing of these events. Radiative forcing is represented by the number appended to RCP, which I will explain in a later slide. In short, however, the larger the number, the faster we expect sea level to rise. The smaller the number, the slower we expect sea level to rise. And in these times of extremist thinking, I feel compelled to explain that the climate deniers who don't believe that there is any change going on are at the bottom. I don't think we have any of those in this meeting. We're all here because we know that the climate is changing. This presentation is not about whether the climate is changing, but about how fast it's changing. Most of the time we see or hear RCP, it is in reference to RCP 8.5. RCP 8.5 was offered by climatologists as a worst case scenario. Let's hear from some of the scientists in their own words. So Zeke Hausfather said RCP 8.5 is an outlier, a high-risk scenario that is unlikely to materialize. His job title is Director of Climate and Energy at Breakthrough Institute, and the reference is provided in case you want to look it up. And as I go through these 12 scientist quotes, I'm just going to read the quotes. You have a copy of this, so you can reflect on the title of the job title and the reference as I go along, but I'm not going to take the time to repeat them all. So Bjorn Stevens says RCP 8.5 should be seen as a low probability, high impact scenario. Piers Foster says RCP 8.5 represents a worst case scenario and should not be considered as a likely future. I added the as, sorry about that. Glenn Peters said RCP 8.5 is often used as a business as usual scenario, but that's not its main purpose. And David Keith said RCP 8.5 is not a business as usual scenario. It's a high emission, low likelihood scenario. And Justin Ritchie said RCP 8.5 exaggerates future emissions, and it's essential to consider a range of scenarios. Richard Toll said RCP 8.5 is a very high emission scenario, and the probability of such a future is low. Kate Marvel said RCP 8.5 is a useful worst case scenario, but it's not business as usual prediction. Rito Nutty, and forgive me if I'm getting these names wrong, RCP 8.5 is an unlikely extreme scenario and not a baseline for policy discussions. Michael Mann said RCP 8.5 is not a likely future, and it is crucial to consider a range of emission scenarios. Chris Hope said RCP 8.5 is an extreme emission scenario with low probability and high impact. And Kevin Trenchburth said, while RCP 8.5 is a possibility, more likely scenarios provide a more realistic basis for climate adaptation strategies. So that was just 12. And, you know, I'm sorry to take your time going through all 12, but I felt that it was important to illustrate through quotes that this is not an outlier. This is mainstream thinking. So now let's dive into what is RCP 8.5. RCP 8.5, or Representative Concentration Pathway 8.5, is a scenario used in climate modeling to project future greenhouse gas concentrations and their potential impact on global climate. It is one of several scenarios developed by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, for its fifth assessment report, AR5, released in 2014. RCP 8.5 represents a high greenhouse gas emission pathway with a radiative forcing of 8.5 watts per square meter by the year 2100. Okay, to understand RCP, we need to understand radiative forcing. Radiative forcing is a measure of the influence that a factor has in altering the balance of incoming and outgoing energy in the Earth's atmosphere. It is usually expressed in watts per square meter. Positive radiative forcing tends to warm the planet, while negative radiative forcing tends to cool it. The NASA graphic to the right illustrates energy hitting the Earth and energy leaving the Earth. Radiative forcing is either the net gain or the net loss of energy over time. Taking a closer look, if we have 340 watts per square meter entering the Earth, but only 331.5 watts per meter leaving the Earth, then we have a net gain of 8.5 watts per square meter. In other words, RCP 8.5 is a radiative forcing of 8.5 watts per square meter. So why are we retaining additional energy? The reason is that greenhouse gases are trapping the energy, as you can see in the diagram to the left. What are these greenhouse gases? Well, they're carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and fluorinated gases. And the reason we talk about CO2 all the time is because it's the biggest contributor by percentage. We are focused on carbon emissions and carbon sinks, carbon budgets and carbon credits, and we're deeply concerned about increased carbon emissions from fossil fuels. This brings us back to RCP. The chart on the right shows net CO2 emissions in the y-axis by time out to 2100 along the x-axis. It shows clusters of model predictions in thin red, brown, yellow, and blue lines, just like the cone of uncertainty that we see for hurricane tracking prediction. Each model has uncertainty due to different variables. The bold lines, which are labeled according to the RCP used, are the arithmetic mean across each of the model runs. This is a good time to reflect on the sentiments of the scientists at the top of the presentation. RCP 8.5 is not a prediction or business as usual scenario, but rather a high-end emissions pathway. It represents a plausible but extreme future. All the models show CO2 emissions decline over time. This is due to many factors. One factor, for example, is that the Earth is getting greener. Satellite imaging shows that plant life across the planet is responding to increased CO2, but growing faster. It is great news because it demonstrates that the planet is a complex system seeking balance or equilibrium. Another example is the changing balance of energy sources. This slide shows energy sources from two different presentations at two times. The one on the left was presented by Rahi in 2014 in the presentation I mentioned at the top of the slide deck, while the one on the right was 4 years later introduced by British Petroleum in a report. The BP report shows that the faster than expected shift from coal to gas. This shift results in less carbon emissions, which in turn result in lower greenhouse gases, reduced energy retention, and lower radiative forcing. And recall that radiative forcing is the number after the RCP. Therefore, this suggests a lower RCP. So you might ask yourself, what's the harm in being more proactive? Why not use RCP 8.5 just in case? Well, let's take a look. These box charts from the journal Nature represent survey analysis. In the survey, climatologists were asked to predict GMSL, or global mean sea level rise, in the year 2100. The first chart is RCP 2.6, while the second chart is RCP 8.5. The y-axis represents sea level rise, while the x-axis represents the distribution of responses. Let me say that again. The x-axis is not time. The x-axis is distribution of responses. So in many ways, this is like a bell curve or something similar. As you may recall, 2100 is the outer prediction date for all of the RCP models. I drew green circles at the midpoints of each RCP, representing the mean across all of the responses. But I do want to point out the gray dots. So the gray dots and you might see in the RCP 8.5 to the right, a gray dot all the way up above the 6th level. It's sort of in the upper right-hand corner. That is one of the responses from one of the scientists. It's an outlier, but it does exist, and I will be referring to it later. Looking at the left chart, the green circle indicates about a 0.5 meter rise in sea level by 2100. Looking at the right chart, the green circle indicates about a full meter rise in sea level by 2100. So what would that look like on HorseNet? This map is the output of the NOAA Sea Level Rise Viewer. By sliding the control on the left up and down, we can see the results of inundation to the neck. This chart is today with 0 sea level rise. This chart is 0.6 meters of sea level rise by 2100 mean prediction from RCP 2.6. As you can see, the tool did not offer 0.5, so I used 0.6, which is a little bit more aggressive. And you see some inundation in the flats. Here is the inundation over the same time period as predicted by RCP 8.5. Again, the tool did not offer 1.0 meters, which is what I wanted. So this one offered 0.9 meters in rise, and you can see more inundation, which is right behind Route 88 and over at the end of the neck on the far left. The next increment after 0.9 is 1.2 meter rise, and I thought that would be interesting, so I included that. And that you can see additional intrusion at the 1.2 meter rise. And you might have noticed in the survey, well, you might have noticed because I pointed it out, that outlier where at least one scientist thought that we would have far greater sea level rise. And so I took the meter all the way up to 3 meters, so the gauge up to 3 meters. And this is what it would look like if that scientist is right. So which RCP should Westport use? It's a great question. I think it's the question of the evening. This chart from Bloomberg shows the popularity of 2 different RCPs, 4.5 and 8.5. So why the camel hump? Why isn't it graduated? You would expect it to be graduated, but there's nobody well, not too many people in the middle who are claiming RCP 6.0. So something's up here. Well, 8.5 was immediately adopted by policymakers in 2014. It has been echoing around in the internet ever since, and the internet never forgets. The second hump is at 4.5, which represents a BAU, or business as usual, which is more appropriate for planning than the extreme RCP 8.5. So as I did earlier to cast doubt on RCP 8.5, let's hear from some of the scientists about this RCP 4.5. So Ottmar Edenhofer said mitigation efforts consistent with RCP 4.5 are crucial for achieving climate stability and avoiding the most severe impacts. And Rachel Warren said RCP 4.5 represents a trajectory that, if followed, could help mitigate the most extreme consequences of climate change. Brian O'Neill said strategies aligned with RCP 4.5 offer a pathway to limit global warming and reduce the risk of severe climate impacts. Detlef van Buren, I think, RCP 4.5 provides a feasible and realistic trajectory for global emissions, aiming to avoid the highest levels of climate change. Valerie Mason Delmont said mitigation scenarios such as RCP 4.5 are essential for limiting the extent of global warming and associated impacts. Glenn Peters said exploring pathways consistent with RCP 4.5 is critical for achieving international climate goals and avoiding dangerous climate change. So now I'll ask you to look at the title, because I've changed it from 4.5 to 3.6. Where did 3.6 come from? Well, I stumbled on it, but apparently there are a bunch of scientists backing RCP 3.6. One of them is Richard Betts, who is quoted as saying, emission pathways comparable to RCP 3.6 are integral to limiting global temperature rise and mitigating severe climate impacts. Chris Huntingford said mitigation scenarios resembling RCP 3.6 are crucial for avoiding the most severe consequences of climate change and preserving ecosystems. Miles Allen said pathways consistent with RCP 3.6 are important for limiting the extent of global warming and reducing the risk of extreme climate events. Deb Hemming said exploring emission scenarios akin to RCP 3.6 is vital for understanding the range of potential climate futures and informing adaptation strategies. I'm not even going to try his name, but this guy said mitigation pathways resembling RCP 3.6 are central to achieving international climate goals and avoiding dangerous levels of warming. And finally, Sonia said emissions trajectories similar to RCP 3.5 are essential for reducing the risk of extreme weather events and preserving ecological integrity. So what's the recommendation? Scientists believe that RCP 8.5 is extreme and not good for planning. Scientists believe that RCP 4.5 and RCP 3.6 are useful for planning. Picking the wrong RCP has negative consequences. Westport should choose the best RCP for planning, not RCP 8.5. My recommendation is to present to the selectmen the proposal to adopt RCP 4.5 for the purposes of planning, to be ratified for use in Westport, and to review it every 3 years for further possible adjustments. Thank you. Back to you, John.
Thank you, David. That's a lot of work went into that, and I appreciate the effort to explain a concept that we've talked a little bit about, but probably haven't understood a lot about. So does anyone have questions of David? Can you, before we get into this, can you get the screen off? So
Yes,
I
I kept it on in case we wanted to refer back to some slides.
Yeah. And let me bring up the, yeah, all right, now I can see raised hands. Any questions of David? Phil? And there's a raised hand icon at the bottom too. All right, so I have, okay. I saw
Well, I have comments. I don't have questions. So
all right, so
yield the floor to people who have questions.
No, comments are fine too. So Phil first, and then I've got Mike Yagman, Mike Sullivan, Jeff Canton, and Jake McGuigan.
Okay, well, I mean, I really appreciate the amount of work that David put into it, but I really think it would be a fundamental error for us not to adopt what the Commonwealth has adopted for its climate assessment and its resiliency planning documents. And I have a bunch of thoughts about that. But let me just first, I'll just quote from a little bit from what was presented in the analysis as to why they chose RCP 8.5. It says the analysis here utilizes RCP 8.5 greenhouse gas emissions as a high-end emission scenario, while also acknowledging that there are small differences through 2050 in the RCP 8.5 and the more moderate RCP 4.5 emissions. And the most meaningful differences in global emissions pathways arise only after mid-century. And it goes on to acknowledge that, you know, in a positive way, that they hope, you know, things will work out better. So I don't think that what the state has done and had a number of, so to speak, independent scientists, you know, review their work. So one, I think that it would just be an error for us to just reject what the state has concluded and built its whole strategy around, and that the town of Westport should go ahead and figure it out on its own. And I don't think we have the technical expertise or the resources to rebuild the models. I mean, what David was presenting would be what the difference would be in 2100. And we're not able to plan out to 2100 right now. We need a plan for the next couple of decades. And I don't really think that there's a significant difference in the modeling or that we have the, you know, technical expertise to take a different model and build it into the models that the reports have built on for sea level rise or extreme temperature. Not saying that we have to ignore Westport's local situations and that we have to accept blindly, you know, what the state has models present. But I don't think substituting the models are the effective way to do it. And I guess the last part of it, in my feeling about it, is who has read good news lately that seems to say that RCP5 is an overestimation of what the negative impacts are going to be? Virtually everything I read says this is the hottest year, you know, that Arctic melting, everything, and even the most recent, you know, global climate meeting seems to indicate that that we are not in a retreating path. And so I think it's better to take the information that we have, use the state's baseline for where we want to proceed, and also all the regional analysis that was built upon it, and spend our energies elsewhere than trying to develop a whole new climate model just for Westport.
May I respond?
No, you had 30 minutes, so I don't want you to respond to everything, but I do want to say before, and we can have a very full discussion here. I'd like to have that, but I do, before we get on with the discussion, want to just structure this a little differently, because Dave laid out something that puts an assumption that I want to say we should not necessarily assume, and that is that the Westport CRC will adopt a RCP of any number. There's nothing that requires us to adopt an RCP. If you think of the recommendations that we have been talking about in our subcommittees, you know, what should we do for soils in the agriculture? Should we elevate the road on East Beach? I mean, pick a subcommittee. Should we find a way to distribute air conditioners to people? These ideas, which we have been talking about, do they depend on what RCP we have? The answer is no, they don't. And in my opinion, they don't depend on what RCP we use. As Dave said to begin with, there aren't any climate change deniers in this group. We're talking about ways to make Westport more resilient. So I think that I don't want people debating this as a foregone conclusion that we must choose an RCP. I don't think, if we want to, we can do that, but I don't think that is something we have to do. We can be silent on that. Now with that, Mike Sullivan's next up to bat. Mike Sullivan.
Thanks, John. No, I want to agree with something that Phil said, and that is that it is problematic for us to try to, use a different standard than the state uses as their gold standard to compare Westport's projects to Dartmouth's projects to Boston's projects. But I think it's important, and David's work here kind of illustrates that our ongoing work as a committee and maybe as individual subcommittees is really going to be important in following what the real trends are. When we say, global warming and climate change, that's a big world of all kinds of predictions and models and such, but they boil down into how they will impact us in like 6 different ways: sea level rise, temperature, localized climate change, whether the oceans become really more acidic or not, whether the Gulf Stream stops, and all, like 6 different things that we need to be monitoring as a group. And we can declare what we think is going to happen in each case. And Phil, I'll say there is one piece of good news that I'm happy with. This model for sea level rise that the state is using predicted 1.25 feet sea level rise by between 2008 and 2030. And we're more than halfway into that. I'm happy to report that we know there's only been 1/10 of that. So as somebody who lives at 15 feet above sea level, I'm happy about that. I'm not happy about the long term of where it's headed, but I think it's important that we put context on 8.5 when we make our recommendations. That's all.
Thank you, Mike. Somebody lowered his hand. Jeff Canton, you're up next.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I have some issues with the presentation. I'm not going to comment on it. It looks familiar based on other campaigns and things that have come up trying to sway public opinion in the past. But I agree with most of what Phil says. And my main concern is that we have to use the data that's available to us. We cannot do the kind of modeling ourselves. And the data that's available to us that is either specific to Westport or represents Westport's condition is very limited as it stands. So my main concern would be if we go this other route, we're gonna have very little data that we can present to the public. Having said that, I think it's very important that we be transparent in the messaging that we're doing, and the outreach that we're doing, and saying, look, this is what these models show. Some of these models may be on the extreme end, we don't know, but this is where things are going, and take it however you want. I don't think we're trying to hide anything. I think we want to be transparent. These are models based on certain assumptions. The assumptions could be dialed back, and things might not be as bad. But what's wrong with being over prepared?
Thank you, Jeff. Jake McQuiggan, up next.
David, appreciate the analysis that you put into it. I'm more of a rational individual. I think when meteorologists can't get the weather correct tomorrow, nor can they predict hurricanes correctly, I don't think we can be using data that essentially will say that. As I'm going to point out, I'm probably the most invested in this as a property owner with Baker's Beach there. So I guess I don't have to worry about my 100-year waiting list, because according to the data that they're presenting, there is no beach left. So anyway, I would also err on the side of caution as to what data we do use in making these decisions. We have a lot of property owners that would be impacted by these decisions about what the town will do with investment-wise on East Beach and other areas. So I just caution the use of an extreme scenario, as many with a political agenda tend to use in these situations. So I appreciate your analysis of this. I don't think anyone else has kind of looked at it to that extent. I agree with you to a point that we probably should not be using the most extreme scenarios. That's just me. Thank you. And I really don't have a question.
Thanks, Jake. Although as a former NOAA employee, I always going to stick up for the National Weather Service because I think they do a great job. And now, if they say it's going to rain tomorrow at 3:00 and it starts raining at 3:05, people get all pissed off because they were 5 minutes off. So anyway, Mike Yagman.
Yeah, I wanted to agree with a lot of what's been said. I think particularly Phil's analysis. I think that number one, I think nobody is willing to make any long-term predictions because there's so many variables here that look at whether COP28 really made any impact on reducing fossil fuels. So I think we need to stick with short-term predictions. I appreciate David's work, but David, you presented one side of the story. You didn't present the scientists that are arguing in favor of 8.4. And I think, John, your point is that we don't need to choose one of these scenarios. Our recommendations are not going to largely be dependent on what's going to happen 100 years from now. They're going to be dependent on what we're going to do over the next 2 or 3 years, and we're constantly going to have to modify those recommendations depending on what happens in the global environment.
Thanks, Mike. Jim Whiten.
Yes, I kind of agree with most everybody, but I do appreciate David's presentation. I learned a lot about what CR 8.5 or whatever it is, and I think it's very, very interesting. But I do believe that in the efforts that I've put into this, even before this committee was formed, to educate myself on what could happen, this prediction that the state uses, 8.5, I've always understood that it's extreme and may not and probably won't happen, but it has to be out there. And I don't think that any of our suggestions are going to depend on suggesting that the town spend millions of dollars doing something based on 8.5 until we get close to that happening. I mean, the only thing that I can see happening with this committee and why I was suggesting that it be formed is that we need to be aware of this stuff going on, and we need to, as I said in the beginning, this committee doesn't have an end. It is continuous, and it's going to come up with recommendations as we go along, and not based on what might happen 100 years from now. And so, for instance, I can't see spending any money today. I think we're going to need to, for instance, do something with East Beach Road if it's going to be habitable in the medium term. But I think we have time to figure out what that is and try to figure out sources of money and what that would do to the overall plan. But gee, I've always understood that the extreme that the state is using as an example is an extreme and probably won't happen, but it could. But we're not going to make decisions based on that. And if we use something else or try to argue with the state that no, we're not going to use 8.5, we're not going to use what everybody else uses, we're going to use 4.5 or 3.6, you're not going to get any grants. So
Thank you, Jeff. Are there other questions? If not, I have a couple of comments, David. First of all, as I said at the outset, you put a lot of work into this, and I understand a lot more about RCV than I did before your presentation. And I am, my head's about to explode, and for that, I appreciate it. I have a few comments. One, a lot of the, I agree with your sense that 8.5 is, as many of the scientists, the 12 that you laid out at the beginning, a low probability, high impact scenario. I think I'm quoting them correctly. Low probability, high impact scenario. I would give another example of a low probability, high impact scenario, and that is my house catching fire. That is a low probability, high impact scenario. And yet I have fire insurance, and I have probably 6 fire extinguishers around the house because my house caught fire in New Bedford. And I think about how would I escape. And schools run fire drills and things like that, because even though it's a low probability, high impact scenario, you insure for it and you plan for it because it's not impossible. So just because it's low probability, high impact doesn't mean you don't plan for it and you don't take actions like buying insurance because it might happen. Secondly, I think as I listened to the language around the people advocating for RCP 4.5, it was we need to hold to the actions of 4.5. What it made me think about is the last COP, not this recent one, where people were saying in Paris, we need to hold the Earth's temperature rise to 2.0, but preferably 1.5, or everything's going to go to hell in a handbasket. And it was not that they thought we were going to do it, but that we needed to do it. And I didn't know whether this was the same kind of language that we needed to achieve the outcomes that 4.5 was achieving with, the downward turns if we were going to win this battle on climate change. Not necessarily that they thought we were going to do it. And the reason that concerns me is that I don't necessarily think the Earth is a self-balancing entity. I believe the Earth is the Gaia, which is not good for us, but that there are feedback loops like melting permafrost, like melting polar ice caps, that once you get rid of the albedo effect of the Arctic bouncing the sun's rays off and replace it with dark colored water that absorbs heat, you start to get negative feedback loops. Once the permafrost starts accelerating the melting, it starts releasing tons and tons of methane, which is 80 times more powerful a greenhouse gas than CO2. And these negative feedback loops start kicking in, and you start to get real acceleration of climate change, which is very bad news. So I'm not as optimistic as you are. But my main point is the one I made, which is all the recommendations we are working on, but elevations of roads, protections of soils, all of the other things, and giving people information that they need to make their own decisions. Whether we choose 8.5 or 4.6 isn't going to stop an insurance company from deciding they're not going to insure properties in Massachusetts or in coastal communities in Massachusetts. They're going to decide that no matter what RFP we pick or whether we don't. They're just going to make that decision. And when they make that decision not to insure anybody, people are shit out of luck. And they're just going to make that decision when they make it. And, you know, what we need to do, our responsibility is to let the citizens of Westport know, hey, that's in play. You know, they've done it in other parts of the country. They can do it here. And when they do it here, you know, mortgages are going to get hard to come by. We need to inform our citizenry. That's our job. So at any rate, my thinking is we don't need to pick one. I think there's a downside to picking something that, as Phil said, goes against the state. I think that may make it harder for us to get state money. But I don't think we need to pick any RCP. And I don't see the downside you see of picking any number. I think we just keep doing our work and be silent on the situation. But Constance, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted some clarification. First of all, thank you, David, for that. I thought it was a fascinating presentation. And I do think it's important to think about how we present this to, you know, what our report is going to be to the Board of Selectmen, and also, you know, what comes out of it for the general town. But I was just, so on one hand, I hear people say that there's no need to pick or to select whether it's whichever number it is, 8.5 or 4.5. But on the other, but then people say, but if we don't use 8.5 and the state's using it, we won't get grants. So which is it? I mean, either, I mean, if we're, so you're saying that if we don't use the 8.5, we're not going to get grants. But yet, on the other hand, we don't need to use any number at all in our predictions or whatever is going, what we want to apply for, what we would like to see happen here in town. So which is it? Do we have to use, I mean, you're saying on one hand, we shouldn't have a number. We don't, that shouldn't even enter into what we're doing because we're not looking at 2100. We're looking, you know, 20 years or 30 years ahead of time, you know, in the future. And then and then others are like, well, if we don't use 8.5, we're not going to get the state's grants.
Michael Burris, do you want to weigh in on Constance's question?
Sure. So I think if you select a particular number, you're going to be held to that number. And I think if we don't select anything in particular, we're not taking a position and saying, you know, this is what we think is absolutely going to happen. So I think if we, we'll kind of dig ourselves into a hole if grantors look at that negatively.
So this is Phil. I mean, I think I don't think it's correct to frame the position as to which of the, the global models that have worked out, because I think that because first of all, those global models have now been taken down to the regional levels, like both in terms of temperature and let's say sea level rise. And if we tried to substitute a different number now, you would really have to go back and then recalibrate if you really wanted to know what the impact was in Westport or on the South Coast. You'd have to go back and recalibrate all those models based on a whole different set of assumptions. And I'm just suggesting that I don't think we have the capacity to do that, and I don't think it's worthwhile, to do that we can start that as a baseline for our discussions. And then I think we can localize it. And I don't disagree with what, Michael was saying is, look at the real-time facts. But it is more of and I agree with Jeff about being transparent, about it. So it would be useless for us to say, okay, we're going with 4.5 or 6, because, well, what does that really mean locally? Well, no one has the answer to that. No one's asked that question, and I don't think it'd be feasible for us to do it. So we should just take the hand we're dealt with and make the best outcome that we can for the town with it.
So let me suggest this as a way of going forward. As we continue to do the work to get these subcommittee reports written, I think David has really done a service for us. I don't see in the comments that have come from all of us, and I appreciate everyone's comments, overwhelming support for any one position here. I don't think that in this report, whenever we write it, which will probably be finished, in 2040, and we'll all know what the answer is, right? We'll all be gathered at Jake's Beach. Is no, we won't.
It won't be there.
It won't be
The
there,
one
right.
thing you were right on, John, is flood insurance. It only quadrupled for us last year.
Yeah.
Flood insurance. So you're right about the insurance industry.
Is that we're not going to have a section in the report that champions the state's position on RCP 8.5, because a lot of us have said that's an extreme position and it's irrelevant to our work, nor are we going to say that we have an alternative to it. We just think it's irrelevant to what our work is about. We're going to talk about the impacts of climate change as it affects Westport in all the dimensions that it takes. That doesn't seem to be a reason to mention RCP in this report. It's a red herring. And if we want to talk about the migration of herring, we can talk about it, but we don't need to have red herrings here. I mean, that's the way I would go forward. Jim.
Yeah, I wanted to just dig down into Constance's question. And I think that there is some validity in the question. So, for instance, say we wanted to apply to the state to protect the lower East Branch from overtopping on East Beach, and to protect the water, the water in the river from being, having that open up. And we go to them and say, okay, we want to raise the level of East Beach Road by 3 feet and the other aspects of doing that, and we want $3 million. And they say, well, 3 feet isn't enough. You've got to be up 7 feet or 8 feet, because that's what 8.5 calls for in 100 years. And we're not going to pay for something that's going to be underwater. So maybe Michael Burris or somebody who is familiar with grant applications, what happens in that example? Will we be able to get money for an interim fix, or do we have to fix it for 8.5?
Jim, I don't think we have to weigh on anything in particular. I don't think the town has to stake out a position on this issue. I think if we were to go apply for funding for a project like you're talking about, then we would just refer to the best data that's available and out there. But I don't think it's, we're staff and volunteers, and we're trying to make the best policy decisions that we can with the information that's out there. And I don't think a town is really suited to stake a claim and say we have to use these metrics. So we're just trying to again interpret the data the best we can. And
No, I understand that, Michael, but the question is, if the state is using the metric of 8.5, will they tolerate spending state money and federal money for mitigation projects that don't live up to that? And I'm not sure of the answer.
All right, well, we're going to leave it at that. We've got a couple other items, and again, Dave Sprogis, thank you very much. Obviously, from the comments, this has really been a very useful discussion. So thanks, Dave, very much for that. I'm noting that the messages on the chat are all recorded and part of the record here. So there have been a lot of substantive messages in the chat. Those are recorded and part of the record. Dave Sprogis, you've raised your hand. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, John. As I indicated in the chat, can we at least conclude by all agreeing that RCP 8.5 is indeed an extreme scenario, an extreme path?
Well, that seems to be a sense of the meeting, but I don't want any votes on it, but yeah. So again, thank you very much for the presentation. I want to get to next meeting is I think February 15th, if that works for everyone. That's not the second Thursday, it's the third Thursday in February. And I want to suggest a slightly different format than this one, because some of the committees are getting their reports, with a lot of meat on them. And so I want to try this out on you all and see what you think. And that is to have this kind of standard agenda, but to have one subcommittee at a time really go through their report in depth, with the idea that the whole committee would have an opportunity to give feedback, brainstorm, whatever the committee chair would find useful for that subcommittee. And in that way, the whole committee gets a crack at the subcommittee report while it's in draft form. And my thought was that I would see if fearless Mike Sullivan would be the guinea pig and go first, because there's a lot of meat in that water subcommittee report. He's got a big subcommittee that's worked to put that together, and see how that would work. But I haven't talked to you in advance on this, Mike. What would you think about that? You're on mute. He's probably cursing and swearing while he's still on mute.
There was a bunch of beeps in there. No, your interpersonal skills are well honed. I can see that you're using the give him a reputation to live up to technique, and I'll accept the challenge.
So this would be all right. So we'll test it out, see how it works, and if you find it constructive, then we'll go down the list with the others following. and see if it's designed to be a helpful thing. It may help you to prod some of the folks you need to prod. I don't know, maybe I'm not on that list who owes you something. So
if you do me a favor, John, and just give me some guidance in the interim about how much time. I'll be submitting a draft report for everybody to review ahead of time, and I'll be just highlighting or presenting and reviewing highlights. You give me some guidance and we'll work it out.
yeah, or you may want the people who did the different parts of it to do their parts, however you want to do it.
Good point. Good point.
However you want to do it. Okay, so with that, we'll be adjourned until February 15th. I wish everyone a really happy holiday. Hope you all get to spend some time with your family, and I hope you don't catch COVID or anything else that you don't want to catch. Okay.
Hope
See
you,
you all.
Thanks, John. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it, guys.
Yeah.
hope you recover from COVID, John.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Dr. Yagman, very much.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Yeah.
Happy holidays. Merry Christmas.